In 1906, President Teddy Roosevelt created the nation's first national monument designation. The purpose of this designation was to preserve for all Americans significant pieces of the country's history, ecology, geology, and beauty. All national monuments are designated by U.S. presidents and are chosen as their personal memorials of those most special parts of this great country. Memorials that they see a need to protect over all others. Some are big, some are small. Some garner large budgets and staff. Others, next to none. All were chosen by presidents who considered them the most important places to protect over all other places in the country. America's national monuments tell the story of the nation's past and present glory. Hello, I'm Jordan Murphy, and I'll be your guide as we visit 11 national monuments located in America's Pacific Northwest. In this program, we'll travel to 3 monuments that preserve some of the nation's greatest fossil treasures. Here at Hagerman Fossil Beds National Monument are the fossil remains that show there was a time when horses roamed the continent, long before the Spanish brought them from Europe.
The modern horse, magnificent. For many, man's best friend. Carriers of conquerors and warriors. Now found throughout the world. However, the ancestor, the mother species of all modern horses, comes from North America. The dominant fossil at Hagerman Fossil Beds National Monument.
We have the base stock here was Equus simplicidans for modern breeds of horses, for the modern species of horses. They migrated to different parts of North America, South America, and some groups of them made their way over into Asia and then dispersed through Asia and then into Africa.
So all Equus species are descendants of a horse that looks like this. The first look at the fossil beds is from high up on the arid sagebrush steppes of central Idaho. Below is the Snake River Valley. In the monument itself, a boardwalk leads to the river. From here, one can clearly see the 3 to 4 million year old sediments from which the Hagerman fossils have been excavated. Hagerman Fossil Beds National Monument was set aside by President Ronald Reagan in 1988. More fossils of Equus simplicidans have been found here than anywhere else in the world. The Snake River Valley that cuts through these fossiliferous sediments is an ecosystem unto itself. Adjacent to the monument is the Hagerman Wildlife Management Area. Thousands of waterfowl use the wetlands, including the numerous pelicans. Nearby are the federal and state fish hatcheries. The many fish farms in the Hagerman Valley produce 70% of the nation's commercially raised trout. Upriver 5 miles, cascading out of the basaltic walls, are large springs. Springs that flow continuously from a giant underground aquifer. A portion of the Oregon Trail which brought 400,000 immigrants to Oregon, passes through the monument. Today, visitors to the monument can walk or ride horses along this portion of the trail, a point 1,300 miles from its start. But perhaps the most curious features found here in the monument are the thousands of giant boulders littering the landscape. These car-sized rocks, called melon gravel, arrived here in the sudden flash of fury 14,500 years ago. That's when the ancient Lake Bonneville discharged an immense volume of water into the Snake River and the Hagerman Valley. When the event was over, Lake Bonneville was reduced in size and became what is now known as the Great Salt Lake in Utah. The Hagerman Fossil Beds National Monuments Visitor Center is located in the town of Hagerman. Inside is an articulated fossil skeleton of the horse the monument is known for, the Hagerman horse. In the 1920s, ranchers in the Hagerman Valley began finding rock bones that looked like this. They knew they were horse bones, but not from any horse they knew. Soon, paleontologists from the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. arrived and determined the skeletons dated back to the Pliocene epoch, 3.5 million years ago. Mary Carpenter and Phil Gensler are the monument's staff paleontologists working on the fossils and the fossil beds. 3.5 million years ago, the Snake River did not exist. The climate was wetter, and the landscape looked very different.
This area 3 to 4 million years ago was the very easternmost portion of Lake Idaho. We were the eastern shoreline. We were actually more in the deltaic environment of the river coming into the lake. So this whole area had little braided streams and marshy deltaic environments, typical of a shoreline where a river comes into a lake. So the animals that were on this edge would die naturally, and then just the bodies would rot through natural events, and the bones would be covered up by those silts and sediments.
Silts and sediments are now preserved in the Glens Ferry Formation that makes up the Hagerman fossil beds.
Well, here we are on Hagerman Fossil Beds. We've got a pretty good area here to look at some of the stratigraphy. These are some classic deltaic sedimentary deposits. Right at my foot level here, you see a nice gray cross-bedded sandstone that represents stream deposits. The layer immediately above it, which is a little whiter, represents the filling in of this stream channel with silts and some fine sands. On top of that, this really dark, relatively dark layer is actually a volcanic ash. This is a basaltic ash, and these are what we use to get the dates on our fossils. And above that, you can see the sequence repeating. Here we do have a nice clay unit that represents probably a shallow pond. Scratching around here, I was actually able to pick out a couple small fragments to turtle shells. Turtles are pretty common here. The last couple years, we managed to excavate a complete turtle shell as well as a complete fish.
They have also found bones of ancient camels, mastodons, pigs, hyenas, and big cats. But it is the Hagerman horse, Equus simplicitans, that is the prize of these fossil beds.
We have the adult horse. This is one of the adult horse skulls. It's very heavy. And you can see the teeth all in place, and the eye orbit and the skull.
Sometime around 12,000 years ago, during the end of the last ice age, horses became extinct in North America. But by then, they had crossed over into Asia, where they survived and prospered, only to return to the Americas with Spanish explorers in the 1500s. The Snake River is one of the most important rivers in the United States. It runs through the lower part of Idaho, eventually joining the Columbia River on its march to the Pacific Ocean. In south-central Idaho, the Snake River Plain was considered to be one of the most inhospitable parts of the country. That is, until the construction of a series of dams and canals along the river in the 1930s. In fact, the Snake is the most dammed river in the country. Today, the region, including the Hagerman Valley, is known as Magic Valley, with a combined population of over 160,000 people. Water from the Snake River magically transformed this desert into one of the country's most agriculturally productive regions, famous for growing the Idaho potato. Agriculture, fossil beds, and the mighty Snake River, all of which can be seen looking down on Hagerman Fossil Beds National Monument.
The fossil leaves found here are some of the finest in the world. The plants from which they came flourished when this dry area was once a tropical forest.
Suddenly, there they are. Rising out of the dry, barren landscape of Central Oregon are the Palisades of the Clarno Unit, the northernmost unit of the John Day Fossil Beds National Monument. This and the other two units of the monument preserve a continuous 40 million year fossil record in volcanic rock. A fossil record of the evolution of mammals as they replaced dinosaurs as the dominant land animal across the planet. Set aside by President Gerald Ford in 1975, the monument's Clarno unit is also geologically the oldest. 40 million years ago, this place was very different and looked like this. Today, a narrow trail winds along the bottom of the Palisades. Here and there, fossil leaves can be found in the remnant of an ancient lava flow. Even a tree trunk. In this unit, unavailable to visitors, are the famous Clarno nut beds, where three-dimensional fossil nuts and seeds are found. Nearby, a small quarry, run by the high school in the appropriately named town of Fossil, provides an opportunity for the amateur collector to dig for fossil leaves from the John Day beds. The second unit of the monument, the middle unit in both geologic age and location, is the Painted Hills unit. Its ashfall layers from ancient volcanoes are unmatched in their subtle beauty.
The coloration you see in these hills, basically being the red at iron oxide, the buff color that you see in there, a combination of iron and magnesium, and the black paw marks and some of the lower stuff that you see in the stripes through there being manganese.
In this unit of the monument, a boardwalk brings the visitor up close and personal to one of the Crimson Hills. The textured clay stones found here are part of the John Day Formation and range in age from 39 to 18 million years old. Again, this was a very different place at that time. In contrast to the pastel reds of the Painted Hills unit, or the lively blues and greens of the third unit's Blue Basin. Known as the Sheep Rock unit, it is split down the middle by the John Day River. All the monument units are in the greater John Day River Basin, whose river eventually empties into the Columbia River on its way to the Pacific Ocean. The signature feature here is sheeprock, a dramatic bluff displaying layer upon layer of the John Day Formation. This easternmost unit of the 14,000 acres preserved by the John Day Fossil Beds National Monument also contains the youngest strata, ranging in age from 18 to 6 million years old. One of the most impressive features here is Cathedral Rock, a gigantic rock that slid down from the high bluffs above the river. During the long time when mammals evolved here, this land was one of the most active tectonic regions in what would become the United States. Indeed, all of the rocks in the monument are a result of volcanic activity and lava flows, uniquely entombing plants and animals for all time. A time brilliantly captured by the murals and fossils in the Sheeprock Unit's Visitor Center. Today, the John Day River Basin is a highly dissected landscape of hills and valleys. Cold in the winter and exceedingly hot in the summer. It is a high desert ecosystem populated by sage and junipers. To the west are the famous volcanic peaks of the Cascade Range, a range that blocks the westerly flow of moisture from the Pacific Ocean. It is now very different than when the tropical and semi-tropical plants and animals preserved in the monument's fossil beds thrived here.
Here in the John Day Basin in central Oregon, there's about a 10,000 square mile series of volcanic rocks that entomb ancient biotas spanning roughly 40 million years or so. There are very few places in the world that you can go to see a 40 million year sequence of floras and faunas entombed in volcanics where one can actually get accurate dates. And in that sense, this is like 8 different national monuments all piled one atop another. Unlike a lot of parks that preserve like a bed of fossil fish or some dinosaurs on a wall or something like that, in the John Day Basin, there's a whole sequence of layer after layer after layer of floras and faunas, often entombed together, that are bracketed by datable volcanic ashes, which allow us to set up a good sequence of the changing climates that happened here in Central Oregon.
The over 3,000 species of fossil plants and animals found in the rocks have been preserved in unique ways.
So for example, in some cases we find here what we call volcanic lake beds, and these preserve exquisitely well-preserved leaves. In fact, in some of the layers there's over 110 different species of leaves, and these were a result of leaves falling into a lake, settling to the bottom, and then subsequent volcanic ash layers going into the lake, settling to the bottom, and entombing the leaves. That's one way fossils are preserved here. Another way over at the Clarno unit is that the fossils are entombed three-dimensionally in what are called the Clarno nut beds, where there are over 300 different species of nuts and seeds and fruits and roots and mammals, all jumbled together in what's called a lahar, which is an Indonesian word that means volcanic mud flow. So that's another kind of way fossils are preserved. In some of like these green colored rocks that one can see over there, these are overbank or floodplain deposits in which About 120 different species of mammals are preserved as a result of dying natural deaths. These animals weren't killed by the ash falls, but were died normal deaths. In many cases were torn apart by predators, chewed on by rodents, what have you, and then were buried in subsequent ash falls, and which secondarily were turned into paleosols, or what we call fossil soils.
The results are exceptionally well-preserved fossils, including mammals such as rhinos, big cats, horses, dogs, and other animals now extinct in North America. Today in the John Day River Basin, a few ranchers eke out a living, raising hay and grazing small herds of cattle. But 200 years ago, the area was frequented by the Northern Paiutes, a Shoshone-speaking Indian culture. Then in 1805, the Lewis and Clark Corps of Discovery Expedition passed nearby. Trappers soon followed in search of beaver pelts. Then an unexpected event transformed this otherwise unexplored region.
However, in 1862, gold was discovered by John Day, or Canyon City, and that gave a lot of interest to everybody coming in here. They did start a military road, wagon road, to go in and collect the gold as the miners were processing the gold and get them in bags. And this was during the Civil War, which is ironic because you wouldn't think that Oregon would even know about the Civil War going on back east. But Oregon was allowed to become a state in 1859, just before the war, because we all guaranteed we wouldn't be a slave state.
So Oregon gold helped fund the war for the North. It also brought a thriving Chinese community to the region. When the gold ran out, settlers, using the 1862 Homestead Act, claimed much of this land and started raising sheep. For half a century, wool was a flourishing business. Ranchers sheared their sheep and brought the wool to the famous Pendleton Woolen Mills on the Columbia River. After World War II, the wool industry diminished as clothes began to be made from synthetic fibers. At the same time as the discovery of gold, Thomas Condon, a Protestant minister and self-trained scientist, recognized the area as a world-class paleontological site. From then on, a steady stream of collectors from America's most prestigious universities and museums poured into the area to gather up its famous fossils. Across from the Visitor Center in the Sheep Rock unit of the monument, the James Cant Ranch Historical Site brings back memories of those early years of exploration, settlement, sheep ranching, and fossil collecting. The beauty those pioneers saw here is still as it was. In one of the most picturesque places on the planet, now preserved for all to see, by the John Day Fossil Beds National Monument.
At the site of this ancient lake bed, fossils like this fish are common.
Tucked on the western edge of the Wyoming border is a spectacular assemblage of flat-top bluffs, rugged buttes, tall ridges, and colorful badlands. all part of the famous 50-million-year-old Green River Formation. A formation that is a remnant of an ancient lake. A lake once teeming with life and surrounded by a semi-tropical forest. Known as Fossil Lake, Fossil Butte National Monument preserves a piece of that long-ago lake, now part of the paleontological record. Dedicated by President Richard Nixon in 1972, the monument's grounds are anything but a lake today. It is a semi-arid sagebrush ecosystem at its lower elevation, with a scattering of pines and aspen groves near the bluff tops. It is at these higher elevations that one might glimpse the largest member of the deer family, the moose. Moose, like all members of the deer family, lose their antlers in the fall and start to regrow them in the spring. The small streams and rubble among the aspen groves are an ideal habitat for marmots, a rather large member of the rodent family indigenous to the Mountain West. Lower down among the sagebrush lives the black-tailed jackrabbit. Jackrabbits are actually hares, not rabbits. Their ears and legs are much longer than rabbits, and they have been known to jump over 20 feet. But the most fascinating animals at the Fossil Butte National Monument are the pronghorns, sometimes called the American antelope.
Pronghorn here, they evolved in North America. They're commonly called antelope, which is a misnomer. Antelope are in Africa, and these are therefore more properly a common name called pronghorn. They're the fastest mammal in North America. They can exceed 50 miles an hour when they're in a sprint. They can cruise at 40 to 45 miles an hour when they're cruising in an open flat area. They rarely jump. That's been an issue. They can jump. They can clear 14 feet fences if they have to. But they rarely jump because they evolved to run straight and fast to get away from the cheetahs that used to be here.
But the main reason for the monument is preservation of one of the world's most important fossil sites. Early in the morning, paleontologist Arvid Osa leads a member of his crew up to the only active quarry in the monument. Here they will join other members who have already been digging for hours. Here they are carefully removing layer by layer of the shale, exposing and collecting fish fossils. Arvid is interested in the discoveries of the day. This rather modest quarry, only 4 feet deep, has produced over 2,000 fossil specimens. Specimens that will be taken back to the lab for careful cleaning and preparation with air abrasive tools. Arvid knows what makes the fossils of Fossil Lake so special.
We like to claim it's the world's greatest fossil site. There's 3 things that we talk about making this a fabulous fossil site. The abundance of fish that are found here. Literally millions have been removed outside of the park in some commercial quarries on private lands outside the park. Literally millions over the last 140 years have been removed from these limestone deposits here. Besides the abundance, we have a diversity that not only do we have the fish, but we have the other aquatic organisms, including plants, all the way from single-celled organisms, bacteria, up to the fish, and then mammals being washed in from the terrestrial ecosystem around the lake. Birds. We used to have the world's oldest bats. We now have the world's oldest articulated bats. India now has an older bat. But we have a great diversity of aquatic and the terrestrial component coming in. We're up to 226 different types of leaves, seeds, and flowers documented from around the lake being washed in. So we have that diversity, and also the preservation is phenomenal here. We have soft body preservation in some instances. Whatever made it to the bottom of this lake became a fossil.
To see some of these fossils, one only needs to enter the Visitor Center at Fossil Butte National Monument. Inside on display is one of the most incredible fossil fish collections. Fossil fish of all sizes and types. Fossil fish on large slabs. And large single specimens. And there is more. Other animals such as this giant stingray. Birds. And reptiles such as snakes and turtles. From high atop a bluff at Fossil Butte National Monument, Wyoming's version of the Wild West stretches out before the visitor. It is a harsh, dry land. Open range, cattle country, cowboy country. However, at one time, this was home to the Shoshone Indian tribe. They occupied this part of western Wyoming and eastern Idaho. Nomadic hunters of the buffalo, they lived in teepees and brush shelters. It was the Shoshone who migrated to and became the dominant force on the southern plains, occupying much of present-day Texas, where they were known as the Comanche. Perhaps the best-known Shoshone was Sacagawea, a Shoshone woman who helped lead the Lewis and Clark expedition through the last leg of their journey of discovery. Reports from the expedition of vast riches soon brought mountain men like John Coulter and Jim Bridger into the region in search of beaver pelts. What they found was something even more valuable: Wyoming's South Pass, a break in the Rocky Mountains that opened the west coast to settlers who moved along the Oregon Trail. A trail that passed just south of Fossil Butte National Monument. Then came the railroad. It was during the construction of the Union Pacific Railroad in the 1860s that workers blasting through the shales of the Green River Formation came upon the first spectacular specimens of fish fossils. They also came upon something else: coal. Less than 10 miles from Fossil Butte National Monument is one of the oldest coal mines in the West. Opened by the Union Pacific in 1881, it is still operating today. Wyoming is the #1 producer of coal in the country. However, today Wyoming's rich cowboy tradition is still in evidence in small town rodeos across the region, while at the same time, commercial collecting of the Green River fossil fish has become big business. "50 million years ago, during the Eocene epoch, Fossil Lake was part of a system of 3 large bodies of fresh water that covered parts of Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. The largest was Lake Uinta, and is also the lake that contains the controversial oil shale deposits. It is estimated that there is more oil in these rocks than all the rest of the oil deposits worldwide. It is rock that burns. The formation of these ancient lakes started with the rising up of the Rocky Mountains during the last period of the dinosaurs.
In the late Cretaceous, we had the Cretaceous Interior Seaway that came up through this part of Wyoming, just to the east of us. And of course, at that time was sea level. And then after that seaway pulled out, tectonics, we have the Wyoming thrust belt through here that warped those Cretaceous sediments up, forming depressions behind, which is where Fossil Lake formed, is in behind that in the early Eocene. Out in front of that upwarping is Lake Goshoot, which is another lake that coexisted when Fossil Lake was here. And so we had forested area at that time. It was quite warm and lots of precipitation, hence the lake forming.
But over time, the climate became drier and the ancient lakes began to dry up.
Lake Uinta formed first, Lake Goshoot followed, and early in Lake Goshoot's formation, Fossil Lake existed. Fossil Lake was the shortest lived of the three lakes. This basin here, that long narrow basin that it was in, eventually filled with sediment. Lake Goshoot continued to have water in it, but very shallow. It was probably a combination of filling up with sediment and the climate changing, and we got less precipitation, more evaporation, and the lakes went away. After those lakes went away, there was sediment that filled in on top, gravels and streams deposit sediments across the top. Those have since begun to erode down, and that's how we get these bluffs around here now, as we've continuously eroding since 30 million years ago, cutting down into these sediments, exposing the sediments in the hilltops here.
Hilltops containing one of the world's greatest fossil treasures. Treasures, some of which have yet to be found.
I hope you enjoyed seeing firsthand the world-class fossils at these three monuments. I'm Jordan Murphy.